What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Sunday Week 3 edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. And we have our Week 3 NFL slate today, talking the main slate on DraftKings, looking at large field tournaments there, how I would be approaching them right now. Should be pretty similar to how I approach them in 3 hours. So going to walk through that. I will talk about things that I like or don't like in my exposures, talk about whatever players I'm getting to. If you have questions about guys that I'm not getting to that you like, feel free to ask. Usually the answer is going to be that I think they're fine. I just don't really have them. But if I have a strong opinion one way or the other, I will let you know. I'm going to go through game by game again, like I think I did last week, just because for NFL, I think that ends up working a little bit better. So not going to break down every single game, but we'll look at the players from each game in that way instead of going position by position, because I end up just talking about every game anyway once I get to the quarterbacks. So I think it works out better setting it up that way. So going to go ahead and go through and do that. If you are watching this back a little bit later, you'll be able to see where I'm at by which game is highlighted up here. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel. All that stuff helps out quite a bit. Jake DeWitt said, stopping by to say congrats from Monday Night Football. Thought you were going to take down college football yesterday as well. Thanks. And yeah, so did I. I felt pretty good about that one, especially after Riley Leonard had the 50-yard rushing touchdown. But Scatterbo scored like 15 DraftKings points on his last drive. He was actually my second highest owned guy too. So I had a ton of him. I had like 65% or something, just not in that lineup. So yeah, that one hurt pretty bad. Definitely was one of the worse. Like, it wasn't a terrible beat because like he was obviously a good play, but like the way it played out was one of the less fun DFS sweats that I've had in a while. But on to today, obviously a lot of money to be made in NFL. So jumping in, starting with the Houston and Minnesota game. In Minnesota, this game does have one of the higher totals on the slate. There is quite a bit of ownership coming into this game. Looks like about 4 guys projected for double-digit ownership, a bunch of other guys in that like 5 to 10% range. And it all makes sense here. Both of these offenses have pretty appealing options to get to. For me, starting with Cam Akers here, getting 25% ownership. I'm up at 44%. I don't love this play. I do also think he's a better play on FanDuel for whatever that's worth. He's only 4K over there. The reason I don't love it is just that he's not likely to be very involved as a pass catcher. And that does not only take away some ceiling from a running back, but it does make it a little bit easier, or a lot easier, for them to just put up a score that ends up not really mattering and fall into that bucket of guys where it's like, well, okay, they did good on a point per dollar basis. He scored, 14 DraftKings points at 4,700, but the raw points don't do enough to help you win a tournament. So I am concerned about that. But at the same time, he is obviously a good value at 4,700. I expect him to get the bulk of the rushing work for Houston with no Dameon Pierce, with no Joe Mixon. I expect Dare Ogunbowale to be the primary pass catching back. So like I was saying, that is a concern and an issue, but he is only 4,700. So I am getting him. He is definitely the type of guy that I would be pretty quick, I think, to get away from if or in lineups where I'm stacking popular quarterbacks. I haven't looked very closely at the stacks that I have on this slate, but I do know some of my highest owned quarterbacks are low owned, which in those lineups, it does make sense to be getting to Akers a little bit more. So this is one of an example of one of those guys that when you're looking at the exposures I'm getting to, it is going to work hand in hand with what I'm doing overall as far as my lineups go, a lot more than the individual player. I think you can make strong cases for not playing a 25% owned Cam Akers. I think you can obviously make strong cases and build strong lineups that do have him as well. So I am getting to him. It doesn't feel great. Fully expect this to be one of those plays that makes me feel like an idiot by like 30 minutes into this game, but he is cheap. He is opening up some other stuff for me, so I'm getting there. Nico Collins, I'm a bit above the field as well. Obviously going to feel good about that one. $7,300 price tag. He has been fantastic so far this year. He was great for most of last year. Actually, week 3 of last year, I had an easy path to 100K if he did anything, and he scored 5 points and then just dominated every other game that season. But going back to him here, and obviously very happy about that. Similarly with Tank Dell, getting to 18% of him. Fields at 11%. This is a really good $5,200 price tag on Tank Dell. I know he hasn't done anything productive so far this year. He has had some very close misses, had the big drop on Thursday night, Monday night, Sunday night, whatever primetime game it was. I think Sunday night the other day, where he was wide open, behind the secondary and basically just let the ball hit him in the face. So early in the season, there's going to be a lot of variance in your performance for one reason or another. In his case, it has just been, close calls that for one reason or another didn't get completed, but he's still been on the field running routes 80+% of the time. He's in an offense that we know, is very efficient, very good. We know that he's a good wide receiver. So at 5,200, you're just getting a price point that is kind of baking in the lack of production so far when there's no actual reason to think that he doesn't have good games going forward and probably very soon. So I like getting there. I'm getting to the Vikings defense a bit, which is surprising, but I have talked about it on shows that pretty much the things that are going to make a defense show up for me most often are being inexpensive and being low owned. And the Vikings are both of those things. 2,400, only getting about 6% ownership. And then one other positive here is, and I've mentioned this before too, obviously it's nice if your defense, the defense that you play, doesn't give up a lot of points, but there is actually some added upside taking defenses against quarterbacks that are actually, are going to throw and look to push the ball down the field, because it does mean getting them dropping back, getting sack opportunities, getting interception opportunities. So that does add a little bit of upside, not to say that I think the Vikings are particularly likely to succeed here, but there is also some negative correlation where, you have Nico Collins getting ownership, you have Akers getting ownership, you have Tank Dell getting ownership. And so in lineups where you don't have those guys, why not just punt defense with the Vikings? Hope that, if all those guys have a bad game, there's a pretty good chance the Vikings defense did well. So I think that's another, argument in their favor in large field tournaments as well. Getting to the Minnesota side a bit also, a little bit over the field here on Aaron Jones at 5,900. I expect Ty Chandler to continue cutting into his workload more than we would really like, but he is still the guy here. He was involved more in the passing game last week, took a little bit of a haircut as far as rush share goes, but still the number one back here, even if Chandler is probably going to be pretty annoying throughout the season. At this price and ownership, I think he looks fine. Sam Darnold right around the field on him and Justin Jefferson. I like the price here on Darnold still at 5,500. He's been solid so far this year. Jefferson, obviously one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. So being able to pair a $5,500 quarterback with someone as good as Justin Jefferson, especially when Jefferson's not that popular either, does just give you a lot of upside in tournaments that I like. Also, no Jordan Addison this week, no TJ Hawkinson. So that's kind of, it can go either way. You're taking quality receiving options, playmakers away from Sam Darnold, but you're also, and you're taking guys away that defenses have to pay attention to. You're taking them away from Justin Jefferson, but you're also creating a situation where if the passing game does happen to do well, it's even more likely that it's just a Darnold to Jefferson funnel, basically. And so I do like the upside there. I'm not getting to him, but I will throw Jalen Nailor in as a guy that I think is a pretty interesting tournament play from Minnesota. He was very good last season in a limited sample at creating separation. He's been very good this season so far at creating separation. He's cheap. He has plenty of opportunities available now without Hawkinson or Addison. So I don't have him here, but especially if I were playing more Minnesota, that is somebody I would want to be showing up a bit. And then down here at the bottom, just getting to a little bit of CJ Stroud, which is obviously fine. Johnny Munt is the primary pass catching tight end in Minnesota. Not that necessarily means much, but it is a weak position. And if they are around 3K and playing, they are pretty much playable. Texans defense showing up a little bit as well. So Cam Akers and the Texans in general looking like the priority here, but a game that I am getting to a pretty good amount. Giants going into Cleveland with one of the lowest team totals on the slate. Cleveland, a healthier team total at about 23, but this is a pretty ugly game overall. Malik Neighbors is getting ownership here. I think it's warranted. Clearly the number one receiver in New York. He had a disappointing week one. He came out last week, had about a 38% target share. Now that was a very, very favorable matchup against Washington, not as good a matchup here against Cleveland, and you are still going to get some ownership coming into him at 6,400. There is no shortage of alternatives in this price range. You can find plenty of good running backs. You can find plenty of good wide receivers priced around him. So it is a spot where I think it's reasonable to go to some pivots and just hope that he doesn't put up a monster game this week. He's still playing with Daniel Jones. He's on a team that has a very low team total. So, there are ways around them. And as you can see, I'm only getting to about 6%. So, obviously a good play good price tag. He's underpriced for his talent level and opportunity, but there are plenty of alternatives as well. And again, this is something that probably goes kind of hand in hand with how much Cam Akers I'm playing. Like the less that I'm playing Cam Akers, the less that I'm playing other popular running backs, the more I can go to popular receivers like Neighbors. But if this is a slate where I am pretty aggressively getting to the chalk running backs, it's going to make me look to find pivots at quarterback and wide receiver more often. And I think that may be what's happening here. Elijah Moore showing up 14% for me. I do like this one. He's only getting 8% ownership. He's in a pretty good spot. He's $3,600, and he's been very heavily involved through the first couple of games for Cleveland. I had mentioned in my notes article last week for Endgame subscribers that Elijah Moore had run a ton of routes week one, pretty clearly looked like, the number 3 wide receiver there. He's up to a 93% route participation for the season. Ran like 80% last week, had a 24% target share. So he's looked, he's been on the field a lot. And at 3,600 and modest ownership, I do think that's a viable punt option. Getting to the Browns defense right around the field, pretty self-explanatory against Daniel Jones. Getting a little bit of Deshaun Watson, Amari Cooper, again, pretty self-explanatory. Watson hasn't played very well, but he is very cheap. He's low owned. He has Amari Cooper to throw to. You can, go Watson plus Cooper plus more, but nothing that I'm really prioritizing there. Elijah Moore is the guy that I'm getting to the most of in this game. Also, as far as the backfield for Cleveland, worth touching on that. I'm not getting to either guy. I do think in like the largest field tournaments, if you wanted to roll the dice on one of Jerome Ford or Deontay Foreman, there is some merit to it because basically what's happening in this situation with the Browns backfield is that we don't know exactly how to project it based on what we saw last week. Jerome Ford dominated touches in week one. And then last week, Foreman came out, got twice as many carries as him. And so the median projection here is that they split carries. Neither of them ends up looking that good. But you have a team that has a 23-point total, is like a touchdown favorite at home. If the Browns were to just come out this week and say, oh, no, it's, Jerome Ford's the number 1 again, or Deontay Foreman's the number 1 running back again, and Ford is just in here on pass catching downs or something, then whichever of those guys is the beneficiary in that situation is like a slam dunk play. And so I'm not getting to them. The field's not going to get to them because of the ambiguity in the backfield and the fact that probably the most likely outcome is that they split. But there is a pretty clear the Browns did something that we didn't expect. The Browns, just chose one of them, and this is one of the best running back plays on the slate. So they are worth considering in large field tournaments, but as you can see, I'm not getting there. It is just a spot that I wanted to call attention to because I'm honestly kind of scared that I'm not getting there. I feel like I should have some. Moving over to Chicago and Indianapolis, this is one that I was really happy with my exposures when I looked at them before the show started. I had mentioned in my week 3 notes article that in my head, the Bears were a really interesting tournament team to get to today. And that in the stuff that I had run last night when I was writing my article, I didn't actually think I was going to be getting to them much, and it scared me. Ran my stuff today, and they are showing up as my most used stack right now. Caleb Williams is my highest owned quarterback at 14%, and I like that. Obviously, the Bears have not looked good. You have Shane Waldron as the offensive coordinator, which means that they may continue not to look good. Caleb Williams, hasn't looked great either, but they are in a dome here in Indianapolis. They have a respectable, 22-point total that isn't too far off from the highest team totals on the slate. And Indianapolis is also missing DeForest Buckner. That's going to hurt their pass rush. It hurts their defense overall. You have no Keenan Allen again for the Bears. So that does create a situation where there should be more targets available for DJ Moore, for Roma Dunze. No Travis Homer takes away a third down back. So maybe you get more DeAndre Swift. Maybe, you get other guys, but there's just clearly a lot of different like narrative type paths here that you can look at. And I don't mean narratives, as far as like homecomings or anything, but like just things that are working in the Bears' favor where I just, in my head, it was like, if the Bears have a big game and I don't have them, I'm going to feel really dumb because there were so many different things you could point to, whether it be, Keenan Allen being out, Buckner being out, the game in the dome, just to be on the Bears first. And so I do like that I'm getting to them here a lot. DJ Moore is the clear priority for me, 6,700, about a 28% target share each of the first 2 weeks of the season. Clear number 1 receiver here. Caleb Williams, 5,600, not getting much ownership at all. I like that a lot. Roma Dunze is cheap at 4,200. I'm, a little shy of 2x the field on him. Hopefully he steps up, very cheap price tag, a lot of upside there. So I really like getting to the Bears passing game here. I'm really happy with that. I have a little bit of DeAndre Swift as well, a little bit of Cole Kmet, but DJ Moore, Caleb Williams, Roma Dunze, I really like single man stacks, double stacks, whatever you want to do. Jonathan Taylor, I'm a little over the field at 7,300. It's a good price tag, given his ability and potential workload. We did see, a big red flag last week when he essentially just stopped being involved on passing downs. He did run routes on 70+% of dropbacks in week 1. So hopefully week 2 is a fluke, but it did kind of sound like it may not be. But when you're thinking about it from a ceiling standpoint, still obviously plenty of rushing touchdown equity for Taylor. And, maybe he just does end up being involved in the passing game again. So from an upside standpoint, I think he makes sense. He's not somebody I'm going too crazy with. Colts defense against Caleb Williams, obviously in non-Bear stacks, there is upside there. Anthony Richardson, plenty of upside. I'm not getting to a lot. Steven said, do we know if Pittman is playing? He was a DNP Friday. He is expected to play, at least as of this morning, last I saw. So as of now, yeah. But for me, it's the Bears passing game here. I'm getting to them a lot right now. I really hope that this is not something that I lose between now and lock, because this is something that I really did want. If they weren't showing up for me on this show, I was actually planning on digging back in a little bit more and seeing if there was anything I could do to just get them to show up. Not something I generally do. Within my process, make huge adjustments just to get to guys, but it was a spot that I knew I wanted to get to, and so I'm really glad that they are showing up for me. Rims and Tim said, do you have more faith in Zeus White or Akers today? Pierce keeps saying White will get a huge workload today. I like White today. I haven't looked to see how much I'm getting to him. This does strike me as a game where you do see him take on a bigger role, assuming it goes according to plan. Obviously we're 1 week removed from a Raiders game where in Baltimore you assumed that the Ravens were just going to be playing with a lead and running the whole game, and then they lost. So, with the caveat that the expected game flow, game script isn't always what happens, it does set up as a spot where I do think White is likely to be very involved. So I'm not sure what I'm getting to, but even if I'm not getting to him, I do think he's a good play. I guess I have to say that I guess at this point, more Akers, just because I know I have more Akers, but it's not really even a faith thing. It's just he's $4,700 and showing up in my lineups more type of thing. I think that they are similar in that they both have that very clear ability to fail because neither one is likely to be involved much in the passing game. We've seen Alexander Mattison as the pass catching back for the Raiders. So you could get, let's say the Panthers, Andy Dalton plays great and the Panthers have a lead or something. You could still get, White kind of game flowed out of it, just like you could get Akers game flowed out of it if Minnesota's playing with a lead. They are both risky in the same way, but Akers is a little bit cheaper, which is probably why I'm getting to him more. Definitely wouldn't use the word faith, though, because as I said when I talked about Akers, I have very little confidence. It's more of just this lineup has a lot of upside because of all the other guys I could get to, and let's hope Cam Akers falls into the end zone a couple times. Green Bay taking on Tennessee. No Jordan Love again for Green Bay. Seemed like he might make it back this week, but he didn't. So it's Malik Willis again, which basically means not a lot of interest in Green Bay here. Tony Pollard looks fine. He's getting 12% ownership on the Tennessee side. I'm not getting too much of him at 6K, only 4%, but certainly a good play if you wanted to get there. He's been more involved as a ball carrier than Tyjae Spears. We saw some increased work in the passing game last week. Spears did get banged up, though, so could have had something to do with it. But Pollard has, looked pretty good this year. I think the upside for him is there. There are just a lot of running backs on this slate, and so it's costing me a little bit on him, and it's costing me a little bit on Josh Jacobs as well. Jacobs getting 11% ownership at 6,700. He's going to get the ball a lot. The only question really is efficiency, because there's not a lot that the Titans need to pay attention to on Green Bay right now outside of the running game and Josh Jacobs. We did see Green Bay do a pretty good job last week of just being creative and finding ways to increase, efficiency and productivity for their guys. So hopefully, if you're playing Jacobs, they do it again this week. I think he's a perfectly fine play at 6,700. I'm not getting there. Just not really getting there, but obviously expecting him to get a big workload here. This is a spot where Green Bay can't really be expected to be trying to throw all that much. It is likely to be a relatively low-scoring game, though. Tennessee defensively has been very solid so far, so that's costing me some Jacobs along with the price tag. Titans defense, I'm right around the field. 2,700 going up against Malik Willis is pretty appealing. The downside, if there is one, is that, like I was just saying, Green Bay probably is going to do everything they can to avoid throwing as much as possible. And like I was saying earlier with CJ Stroud, if you're going to just have an offense an opposing offense that is running the ball, is running clock, not running as many plays, not putting the ball in the air, it does lower your ability to score defensive touchdowns, your likelihood of scoring defensive touchdowns. But at the same time, the Packers aren't likely to score a lot of points. And whenever Malik Willis does put the ball in the air, you have plenty of pick six potential. So the Titans do still look good here, especially at that cheap price tag. Chargers taking on the Steelers, one of the big uncertainties injury-wise for this slate, although I'm not really sure how much it matters from a DFS standpoint, because if Justin Herbert plays, I'm not getting to the Chargers here. If he doesn't play, I am definitely not getting to the Chargers. So it is a big spot to pay attention to, but I don't know that it matters all that much as far as who's getting into my lineups. I don't have any Steelers defense right now, which is a little surprising. That is a spot that will certainly look better if you're getting Easton Stick or somebody else at quarterback instead of Justin Herbert. But for right now, it's just getting to the Steelers a little bit. Justin Fields and George Pickens, a little over the field on both guys. I like it just from a pricing standpoint. Justin Fields, we know the amount of rushing upside he gives you, 30+% rush share in each of the first 2 weeks, 5,400. We've seen plenty of games where back, with his time with the Bears, where he breaks a run and then suddenly he's the quarterback you have to have at cheap ownership. And then with Pickens, it's basically a talent and salary play. He's not getting any ownership. He is the very obvious number one passing option for Fields when he throws. He's talented, Pickens. So it's just kind of saying, at these salaries, it's very easy to envision a game, and there will be a game or two at least this season where Fields just connects on a big play with Pickens. Fields runs for 60 yards and a touchdown, and this is a really good pairing to have. So getting to them in small amounts is perfectly fine, but also not a spot that I expect to really be prioritizing here. Freiermuth showed up in 1 out of 50 lineups, whatever. He's a tight end. The opportunity cost there obviously really low, but pretty unappealing game overall. Now getting to one of the worst offenses in the NFL with Denver taking on Tampa Bay in Tampa Bay, and mostly getting to the Bucs here. Bucs defense showing up a ton for me. This one surprises me because they're so popular. 20% projected ownership, but I'm getting basically 2x the field there. Usually I try and be more contrarian at defense, but they are only 3K. They are in about as good a spot as you're going to get. Bo Nix will turn the ball over. The Broncos rather aren't likely to move the ball. They're not likely to really score. So as long as you're being contrarian elsewhere in your lineups, you can certainly still play a team like Tampa Bay. And, again, like if I'm playing something like Caleb Williams, Roma Dunze, DJ Moore stack, I kind of just want good projected plays around that because I'm already contrarian with upside there. And the Bucs do give you that. So a lot of it depends on, what you're doing as far as the rest of your lineup goes, but very obviously a top defensive play today. And yeah, there's nothing really negative to say about Tampa Bay here. Godwin looks good, getting 18%, Fields at 17, 6,500. He's up to a 65% route share out of the slot, which is beneficial for him historically. He does just get open more, produce at a higher rate when he's in the slot. So he looks very, very good. Rachaad White, a little over the field there. I am a little concerned on him. Like I'm fine getting to him. The Bucs are likely to score a bunch of points. They are home favorites. White's, been involved in the passing game and obviously the running game as well. So I'm fine getting to him. My minor concern here is that we have seen a 30+% rush share for Bucky Irving in each of the first 2 weeks. And this is a game that very easily could just be non-competitive and the Bucs are playing from ahead. I'm a little concerned how much Bucky Irving potentially cuts into Rachaad White's workload in a run-first game script. We haven't seen that yet. The Bucs took care of Washington week 1, but it was never a game that was not like non-competitive or out of hand. And then, so we haven't really seen how much more does Bucky Irving get the ball in those types of games, but still at 6,100, I'm fine getting to some White here. A little over the field on Baker Mayfield. Pair him with Godwin. You can pair him with Mike Evans. That's perfectly fine. One interesting thing with Evans, obviously he had the big week 1, didn't do a lot last week, if I remember correctly. And he's typically, that boom or bust type receiver. He's been extremely good at getting separation so far this season. Again, that could just have to do with playing Washington week 1. But if you look at wide receiver separation score for all wide receivers that have run at least 20 routes this year, I'm using the Fantasy Points data suite, which I highly recommend checking out. He, by a very, very wide margin, has been the best wide receiver at getting separation so far this season. George Pickens, by the way, is second. Chris Olave is third. Jalen Naylor is fifth. Adonai Mitchell is fourth. But Evans has been the best by a wide margin. So that, doesn't do a whole lot from an actionability standpoint, but it is kind of just interesting to notice, clearly still playing at a very high level despite being in the league for a very long time. Philadelphia taking on the Saints in what should be one of the highest owned games on the slate. They're in the Dome in New Orleans. You have two offenses that are good. Obviously, a lot to get to on the Philadelphia side. And then the Saints looking like a unbelievably good offense through two games with Clint Kubiak as well. They will, of course, regress. They'll come back down to earth. But I think they are still going to be a good offense, even assuming that they don't finish the season as the best in the league. I had mentioned it coming into the season. I was paying attention to it coming into the season, drafting these guys in best ball. They were just going from an offense last year that was basically from the Stone Age to an offense this year that was likely to be a modern offense with Kubiak coming in. They've been using motion a lot, using play action a lot, doing a lot of things to maximize their personnel. I think it was Jacob Gibbs, but I could be completely wrong. Somebody that is a good follow on Twitter wrote, or no, it was I think it was Solak maybe, wrote an article for ESPN detailing like all the stuff that New Orleans is doing offensively to maximize their guys. Really good read and just, interesting stuff. It's always nice when you do see a coordinator come in and actually do things to maximize his personnel, because I think that's one reason that you see such limited offense for a lot of teams in the NFL is just coaches refusing to adapt, looking to do what they think the best way to play offense is, regardless of who their players actually are. Here in New Orleans, you have them maximizing the guys that they have, and it's working out really, really well. Alvin Kamara getting 30% ownership. I'm at 28%. Looks good to me. Obviously, big role in the passing game. Also, no Taysom Hill today, so that is a slight bump for Kamara, just because Hill, gets a couple carries here and there, but also somebody that potentially steals touchdowns around the goal line. Now that's not happening, so makes him look a little bit better. At 7,500, obviously, there's plenty of pivots, both at running back and wide receiver, plenty of talent in that price range at lower ownership if you have a chalky lineup and need to go somewhere else. But Kamara looks good here. I love Chris Olave here, 20% of my lineups, 16% for the field. He's only 6,300. He hasn't had that big breakout game yet. We've seen Rashid Shaheed do it twice. But Olave just basically running bad through 2 weeks, had like a 38% target share last week. I think got tackled at the 1 yard line at least once. Also, he's getting open. Like I said, third in separation score so far this year. It's just a matter of time before Olave breaks out and has a big game. 6,300 is just not factoring that in at all. I love getting to him here. Devontae Smith, 23% projected ownership. I'm only getting to 12. I think he's very obviously a good play. Had a 30+% target share last week without AJ Brown. He should get plenty of opportunities again today. It's just that, he is getting a lot of ownership at a volatile wide receiver position. There is a lot of talent around him. Chris Olave in this game getting less ownership. DJ Moore at a similar price point getting less ownership. So sort of like I was talking about before with Malik Neighbors, even though I think Smith is a very good play, I think Neighbors is a good play. It does just look like wide receiver is a position where I am getting a little bit more contrarian, probably because of the approach that I'm taking at running back today. And there's just no shortage of upside guys that you can pivot to. Chris Olave, again, being one of them. Jalen Hurts, a little bit over the field. I assume most of my Smith lineups are with Hurts because that would make sense. Right around the field on Shaheed, a little bit below, but I think he looks very good at 5,300 as well. I like Foster Moreau, 5% ownership there, only 2,600. Taysom Hill being out probably is a benefit for him. Hill does get a little bit of work as a sort of tight end. Moreau has ran more routes last week than Juwan Johnson. And at 2,600, $900 less than Juwan Johnson. That's where I will take my shots. He's probably not going to do anything, but he's very, very cheap. Tight end sucks. There's not really any tight ends that you're going to feel good about outside of a couple. And so just paying all the way down, getting to Moreau, hoping maybe he gets a goal line target or two, especially with Taysom Hill out. Makes sense. Dallas Goedert getting 6% ownership. I'm at 4%. He's cheap. No AJ Brown, in theory, should open things up for him a little bit. Kind of surprised I'm not getting more, but the field's not really getting there a ton either. I do think the problem is kind of that you're likely to either save more money at tight end going down to guys, around 3K, or you're going to find the $900 or so to get up to Brock Bowers, who is fantastic. So I think that's probably why I'm not getting a lot of Goddard and why the field's not getting a lot. Derek Carr at 5,800, still going to look good. I'm not really getting to him much. This is a spot where probably I'm pivoting to Caleb Williams a little bit at a similar price range and less ownership. Saquon Barkley, 8.5% ownership, 7,700. He is, for example, a guy that you could use to pivot away from Alvin Kamara. I do have a much higher projection on Kamara, so I'm still getting there more. One other potential kind of use for Saquon is in lineups where you don't have a 25% owned Devontae Smith. Assuming the Eagles score points here, Barkley is the most obvious way that the Eagles score points that doesn't involve Hurts throwing to Smith. So does kind of work as a leverage play there as well. But again, not a route that I'm really taking. It is one that I think is just worth mentioning, though. Moving on to Carolina at Las Vegas, we have Andy Dalton getting the start for Carolina. So their offense kind of has to be better. It can't be worse. I don't know what Andy Dalton is at this point in his career, but it's got to be better than Bryce Young. Deontay Johnson getting 9% ownership at 4,900, showing up 12% for me. Like I said, it can't be worse. Deontay Johnson, historically has been very good at getting separation, getting open. He's never really had particularly good quarterback play. One thing that did stand out to me is that he has played like shit this year. I am willing at this point to attribute all things bad involving Carolina to Bryce Young and just assume that things get better with anybody but Bryce Young. But Deontay Johnson has a very, very low, a negative separation score. He's not creating separation. He has an 8% win rate on his route so far this year using the fantasy points data. That does not rank in the top 100 for pass catchers. So, like I said, I'm willing to just attribute all of this to Bryce Young and just how unbelievably bad this offense was, especially in the case of somebody like Deontay Johnson, who has a track record of being very good at creating separation, getting open. But it is something that I'll be paying attention to going forward. At 4,900 here, I'm not overly concerned about it. Still happy to be getting to him as a value play with the new quarterback. But something I wanted to point out, Brock Bowers getting 15% ownership. I'm only at 8. I wish I was higher, but again, I think from a roster construction standpoint, I am just kind of sacrificing tight end, and it's opening up, getting to good receivers, getting to good running backs, Cam Akers aside. So obviously very, very good. He's not missed a beat. He's come right out of the gate as a rookie tight end, very, very heavily involved for Gardner Minshew in an offense that actually has been throwing the ball this year. Very, very talented. Wouldn't talk anybody off of him. I'm just not really getting to him as much as the field. I'm around the field on Minshew. So not really getting to Zeus White here, which goes back to that other question where I guess I pretty clearly have to say Cam Akers since I have 44% Akers and only 2% White. That's how things worked out for me when I ran my stuff. I don't make a lot, like I was saying, I don't make a lot of, adjustments like going back and saying, oh, well, I want more White. I want less Akers. In my head, I would like having more White and less Akers than I currently have, but pretty clearly preferring Cam Akers for one reason or another. Probably just the $800 price difference opening things up for me. Assuming that the Raiders play from ahead here, this is a good spot for White. We've seen Madison involved, like I was saying, as the pass catching back. If they're playing from ahead, that's less of a concern, and White should be more involved. So I do think he's a pretty good play, individually by himself. He's just not really fitting into the lineups that I built. So that is an interesting one. I guess that's a pretty popular play that I just will be hoping doesn't have a good game today, at least with the way my lineups look right now. Miami taking on Seattle. No Tua. So we have Skylar Thompson getting the start at quarterback. That essentially makes me not interested in the Miami passing game. Obviously Tyreek Hill's really good. He can maybe get open. Ken Thompson get him the ball, though? Probably not. So the field's not going to Miami passing game. Neither am I. I am getting to a ton of HN here, though. 7K price tag looks very good. 17% projected ownership. We still don't have, or Raheem Mostert was doubtful as of this morning. I don't know if he's actually been confirmed out or not. But last week we got a 65% rushing share for HN, which was up from 40% in week 1. Mostert's absence was huge in that regard. We didn't see Jeff Wilson step in and take on a bigger role. We didn't see Jalen Wright step in and take on a bigger role. That doesn't mean that they won't this week, but we didn't see it last week. We even saw HN play through garbage time for God knows what reason. So they clearly weren't concerned about his injury that he had coming into the game. They're not concerned about limiting his touches, which was a big talking point this offseason amongst, best ball guys. You can't draft HN as early as he's going because he's injury prone or he can't handle, that many touches. Miami doesn't seem to agree or be concerned about that. So the huge bump in rushing workload last week was nice. We've seen him involved in the passing game both weeks. Obviously now you have a different quarterback, but seems pretty likely to me you're going to be getting some checkdowns from Skylar Thompson, probably 19% target share week 1 for HN, 18% week 2. I absolutely love getting to him here. I'm getting to 50% Charbonnet as well. I don't love this one. I would like this to drop. I understand why it's happening. And again, I'm not going to go in and like lower him or anything, but it just doesn't make me comfortable. 29% projected ownership. I'm basically 2x that. You don't have Kenneth Walker again, so you should see Charbonnet dominating touches out of the backfield here, which obviously is good, gives him a lot of upside. I just think that he's kind of priced for it. Had a 74% rushing share last week. Salary's at $6K. So it's not like Cam Akers where you're getting, a sub $5K value or anything like that. He's typically not heavily involved as a pass catcher, which just concerns me whenever you do get a running back in this range. 11% target share last week. So not likely to get there on passes, which, is scary. But again, I think it's just that the price tag is good enough for somebody likely to get as many touches as he is, that he's showing up. The other concern for me is that Seattle had one of the highest pass rates last week. I talked about that, I think, on this show last week, that, Charbonnet was clearly the guy that was likely to get a lot of carries and going to get some ownership. But one way that Seattle could handle Kenneth Walker being out was just throwing the ball more. And we did see that last week. Now, here at home against a Skylar Thompson-led Miami offense, it's likely that they just don't need to. And so that's another thing, working in Charbonnet's favor here, is that you are likely to just probably have a little bit more neutral play calling, a little bit run heavier play calling than you had last week, which just means more carries, more opportunities for him. So I do think he's a good play. I do obviously like him, but it is one of those where like I'm looking at it and like all the negatives are just jumping out to me as well. I feel like I have to point them out. This isn't, a how does Charbonnet not get there type play to me. It's more my lineups look really, really good if he does get there because of what else I can do around him. Now, hopefully he does it. So HN is the exciting one here, I think. Charbonnet is the one that I'm just staring at. Like, I really hope this guy doesn't kill me. Dolphins defense showing up a little bit for whatever reason. DK Metcalf, I'm about half the field. I think he's fine. Again, Seattle did throw a lot last week, but Metcalf, if they do that, is obviously going to look really good. 6,300 is a good price tag. Smith and Jigba getting some ownership as well. I'm a little below the field. Not going to talk anybody off of the Seattle passing game. It's just not where I'm getting to, obviously in part because of how much I'm getting to their running game. But yeah, you need him to get in the end zone at least once probably to be glad that you played him in tournaments. Leland said, any interest in Miles Sanders? No. I don't have any interest really in Carolina, period, especially guys running the ball for that team. San Francisco taking on the Rams in LA. I'm interested to see what my exposures look like in this one because I could see it going a lot of ways. Jordan Mason showing up a lot for me in just add another one to the group of running backs that I really don't want, but I'm getting to. He's basically just the same thing I was just saying about Charbonnet. The price tag at 6,200 is still cheap for a running back that is going to touch the ball as often as him. 74% rushing share in week 1, 80% in week 2. Now you also don't have Deebo Samuel, who didn't get carries last week, didn't get goal line work last week, but was a threat to, did get some carries in week 1. So you lose another vulture threat in Deebo. Mason's workload here is very, very safe. So that's the benefit. That's the plus. That's why I'm not upset about getting a lot of him. The two downsides are he's not likely to be very involved in the passing game. That's just not, who he is as a player. Last week, 3% target share week 1. So this is somebody that you need to score. You probably need him to get over 100 yards. And the other concern here is it goes back, I've talked about it already in injury situations so far this season. Whenever key players are out for an offense, obviously the guys stepping into a bigger role project better because they're going to have more opportunities. The part that is more difficult to quantify is at what point does the offense just stop functioning well and stop being able to move the ball? You're now talking about an offense that doesn't have Christian McCaffrey, doesn't have Deebo, doesn't have George Kittle. So that means a lot of opportunities are open for guys, but it also means they might just suck. You're basically relying on Brandon Ayuk to be the entire passing game. Juwan Jennings, no disrespect there, but as far as playmakers go, you're basically just relying on those guys. Eric Saubert, showing up for me because he's a minimum salary tight end, but you lost a lot of skill here offensively, and at some point, Brock Purdy might just not carry this offense, and they might not score a lot of points, and they might not move the ball much. So, though that is a big concern, I think for Mason. Again, it's not a big enough concern that it's keeping me from getting an uncomfortable amount of him, but it is a concern. Brandon Ayuk, chalk receiver that I am getting to, 6,200. I have 40%, Fields at 32. So again, that's another reason probably that you are seeing me not get to as much Neighbors, not get to as much Smith. It's going to, I'm not I'm not looking to play in large field tournaments a bunch of lineups that have like Mason plus Charbonnet plus Akers plus Ayuk plus Smith, big combinations of those guys. So that's why you're seeing some of those guys get pushed down a little bit. Saubert, again, I don't have any confidence in him. I don't think he's likely to have a good game, but he is 2,500 at tight end, and it's just going to open the door for me to do some other stuff. So I don't mind it. Jennings, 4,100 wide receiver. Again, opportunities should be there. What he does with them, your guess is as good as mine. 12% ownership seems pretty reasonable to me. I'm at 16%. So I'm getting to the Niners right now. I don't love it. I wouldn't have been upset if I'd done this show and just wasn't getting to them because of potential efficiency concerns. But at the same time, they are clearly some of the best point per dollar plays on the slate, given all the opportunities available with no Debo, McCaffrey, or Kittle. You just have to hope that they can move the ball. It does help, that they are indoors. They're going up against a Rams defense that should let them move the ball. So the matchup, the game environment, all of that does work in San Francisco's favor, even though they are missing key players. Kyren Williams, I'm right around the field on him at 10%, 7,100. Was a bit more involved in the passing game last week, which is, could just be a 1 week thing, but with Kupp getting hurt and no Puka, that was something that potentially is a big takeaway. 19% target share for him last week compared to 6% in week 1. So I do think that's interesting. Something that you can point to for Kyren Williams that does make him a pretty interesting tournament play here. Not getting to much of anything else. Power asked about my take on Whittington. I think that he's fine in tournaments. I'm right around the field. Have projected for 4%. I'm at 4%. He's 4,200. I think he makes sense as like a pivot to Juwan Jennings, a lineup like that where you need a player in that price range. Maybe you don't want to take on Jennings ownership. I think that there are plenty of different ways things can go for the Rams. One thing to keep in mind is that they generally don't play a lot of 2 tight end sets, and Davis Allen is also out. So it is likely that they are still, putting receivers on the field. So Demarcus Robinson, Whittington, Parkinson, Johnson, all likely to be, involved. Obviously, you can't rely really on any of them to be great, and I'm not really getting to much of them, but Whittington at low ownership, I do think is fine in tournaments. I don't have any problem with that because there is just volatility, uncertainty in his role. We saw him look good in the preseason. Obviously, targets are available in this offense. So if he can just step up, get open, earn those targets, then you're in a situation where next week it's just like, oh, Jordan Whittington's chalk at 4,800 because we saw what he did. So I think that, again, he's fine in tournaments. I'm not comfortable with him. I think there's a lot of ways this can go, but obviously the upside for him is there. I'm not really getting to Brock Purdy, but I don't mind it if you do. I think the case for Purdy is that a lot of times in tournaments, and this doesn't seem to be a week that I'm doing it, a lot of times in tournaments, I do like getting the low-owned quarterback with the chalk guys where the field is basically saying, Brandon Ayuk's going to have a good game. And I guess Jordan Mason's not really related, but Brandon Ayuk's going to have a good game. Juwan Jennings going to have a good game. And we're not going to play the quarterback that makes them have a good game. So I don't mind Purdy from that angle, but I'm not really getting to him much. Pollard or White in cash. I don't think I have either one in cash. I would probably go White first. His team's just likely to score more points. But I don't think I have either of them in cash. Would I play lineups with both Ayuk and Saubert without Purdy? Yeah, that's fine. They both can very easily put up good games for their salary without Purdy having a big game, especially, with Saubert being 2,500 and tight end being such a weak position. If he gets in the end zone, gets like 11 points, he could just be one of the best scoring tight ends, much less one of the best point per dollar ones. So you don't need Purdy to put up a big game, be one of the best quarterbacks for Ayuk and Saubert to have good games. I don't have any issue with that. I generally don't have too much of an issue with 2 pass catchers, especially in full PPR as well. Baltimore taking on the Cowboys in Dallas. This should be a high-scoring game, should be a competitive game. So maybe some DFS stuff to get to here, but also pretty efficient pricing. The Cowboys are the side that I'm getting to the most. Jake Ferguson, 12% ownership. I'm getting 22%. He's one of my favorite tight end plays this week. He's another reason probably I'm not getting to too much Goddard. Missed last week, but came back this week. He is a good pass catcher. They'll use him in the red zone. 4,500 is a good price tag. Just looks like a good value play. CeeDee Lamb, I'm a little over the field on him as well. $8,800, obviously the number one wide receiver here for Dak. And I'm getting to Dak also at 5% ownership. 6,600, pair him with Lamb, pair him with Ferguson. You get a high upside stack there in what's likely to be a pretty high scoring game. So I like the Cowboys here. I like that. Dak is one where, you're going to get some ownership coming into Ferguson, some coming into Lamb, but nobody's really playing Dak. So I do like getting to him. He fits nicely. So Cowboys, I like getting to. The Ravens on the other side, I don't have an issue with. They're just not really showing up for me. But Zay Flowers has been the very, very clear number one receiver there. He is 6,800, which is relatively expensive, but not getting any ownership. I'm right around the field at 4%. Don't love the salary, but I do like the way that he's been involved for the Ravens so far. Lamar obviously is a high upside quarterback whenever you can get there. Mark Andrews, once again, ran more routes than likely last week. The Ravens also utilized 12 personnel a lot less frequently than they did week one, which makes Isaiah Likely's role a lot murkier. Andrews is going to be on the field one way or the other, most likely. That's what we've seen so far. So them not using two tight ends as often as week one doesn't do a whole lot for me as far as making Andrews riskier the way that it does for making Isaiah Likely riskier. And then finally wrapping things up with what should be another high scoring game in Arizona. Detroit taking on the Cardinals. I would hope that I am getting to a lot here. I'm not, which is scary. The field's, I guess, not really getting that much either. This is an expensive game, so I guess it is a game where, it's likely to be high scoring. There is a lot of tournament upside, but pricing is pretty efficient. St. Brown coming in at 8,200, getting 8% ownership. I'm even with the field there. Dominated targets last week before he left the game early, got banged up. Good to go this week. Want to go right back to him where I can afford it. But as we've seen, there is a very strong 6 to 7K wide receiver range. Then you also have CeeDee Lamb in this price range. So that is what's keeping St. Brown's ownership down for the field. And for me, is that you're kind of overpaying to be contrarian, not overpaying in the sense that he shouldn't be 8,200, but overpaying in the sense that you can save a lot of money and play Chris Olave or Devontae Smith or Godwin or any number of, Malik Neighbors, any number of other really, really good plays that just are less expensive and allow you to get good options elsewhere. So that's why the ownership's not really high there. Goff, obviously pairing him, with St. Brown or with Williams looks fine. Jameson Williams has been very good, getting open a ton, getting 6% ownership. I'm a little below the field, but the upside looks really, really good. Again, it is just a very deep wide receiver position. Trey McBride, if you're going to pay up at tight end, 6,200. Getting 10% ownership, dominating targets, 29% target share through each of the first two games for Arizona. This is a position where roster construction-wise, I am just very likely to pay down, and that's costing me McBride. But if you are going to pay up, getting him looks pretty good. Pairing him with Kyler looks fine. I do also, and I'm not getting to him now, but I wanted to mention it. It's difficult to get to him because of the salary, but Marvin Harrison Jr. coming in at 7,400 is still an interesting tournament play to me because of the upside that he offers. I think it is completely overpaying to be contrarian, but it is, I think, worth noting that through the first 2 weeks, Detroit defensively playing a lot more similarly to the Rams than to the Bills, the two teams that Arizona has played so far. We saw a lot of too high looks from the Bills, taking away, the deep ball. We saw Harrison not get targeted, not have a big game. We saw most of the first reads in that game going to McBride and Dortch. Then last week you had the Rams, who play a lot more one high and leave the sidelines potentially open more for Harrison. We saw the big game from him. Granted, one of those touchdowns was a deep ball right down the middle of the field into double coverage where he just perfect throw and he got it. But as far as the way Detroit has played defensively, they have been a lot more similar to the Rams than the Bills. And if we are going to see Arizona basically dictate their offense through, the looks that they're getting, the way that in week one, it was prioritizing Dortch and McBride. And then last week you saw a bit more for Harrison. I do think you could see another big game from him this week. All that being said, I'm obviously not getting to him. As you can see, he is still, it's just tough because you're paying more for him than that entire range of Smith, Neighbors, Godwin, Olave, so it is really, really tough, but I do think the matchup is still pretty favorable here. This is a game that, I'm not getting to, the field's not getting to. Wouldn't be surprised if it's just the one that shoots out and that you have to have. But, it is tough. Do I take anything from Goff not in a dome? I'm not necessarily dinging him, but might play some Arizona defense. Arizona plays in a dome. Yeah. I'm pretty sure you would die if you played football not in a dome on Sunday afternoons in Arizona. So no. But yeah, that's all I have. That's every game. If there's any last minute questions, go ahead and get those in. But that's all I have for this one. It's a pretty ugly slate, I think. There's not a lot of spots that look really appealing. It might be retractable, actually. I don't think it is. I've driven past it a bunch of times. It's always been closed, but maybe it is. Um, but yeah, I'm pretty sure it's not. Maybe they just keep it closed when nobody's playing there. Um, Either way, it's not changing anything for me, whether the roof is open or closed, if the roof even does open or close. But yeah, any last minute questions, I'll take those. Otherwise, don't forget to sign up for Endgame using the link in the description below. Get access to all of my content, DFS strategy, instructional videos from Utical, Brick75, Nerdy Tenor, and myself, helping you improve your process, get better in a sustainable way at making money at DFS. So check that out. Better play Jennings or Whittington. I think Jennings, there's just less uncertainty there. He is like, Jennings' role on this team. He's going to have a bigger role without Debo. So he is the one that projects better for me. Whittington is more of a wild card, where that's not necessarily a bad thing in tournaments, because like I was saying, you're going to have a lot more information on Whittington after this week. And there is some chance that the information is, oh shit, I should have played a lot of him last week. And if you did play a lot of him this week, like, you're just printing money while everybody waits to see what happens. So volatility isn't a bad thing in tournaments, but from just a projection standpoint, a quote unquote better play standpoint, I think it's Jennings. And okay, so it is retractable. Yeah, but no, I would have more of a concern if this were like an outdoor, like, elements type game. But even if the roof's open today, like, he's playing in perfect conditions in Arizona, I would assume. I would have more of a concern when you take Goff and throw him into like Green Bay in November or something. Ricardo said J.K. Dobbins. I don't have any. His price tag jumped up on DraftKings. This is also a game where the Chargers are playing a good defense. They are slight underdogs on the road. You're still getting split carries in the backfield. And for me to want a running back at this price tag that is splitting carries, I want it to be a spot where I'm confident that his team is just going to have a ton of plays, run the ball a lot, be ahead, be in a good matchup. None of those things apply to J.K. Dobbins here. And then if we've gotten Herbert's status yet, but if Herbert misses this game, then the offense is just unlikely to be able to move the ball at all. So I don't have any real reason that I'd want to get to J.K. Dobbins here. Can both White and Adams go off together with their game projected to be shortened due to the run game? They can. I mean, the idea would be that, like, Devontae Adams scores 2 touchdowns and goes for, 80 yards or something in the first half, ends up getting over 100, and then White is running a lot in the second half. There's definitely ways that it can work. Also, keep in mind that White is cheap, so that helps. I used to not play running backs and wide receivers together, like, by design. That's something I've gotten away from, just from seeing how often it actually won milli makers, because there is the correlation component of, if an offense is just moving the ball consistently and doing well, you get more touchdown opportunities for everybody. And so you're not necessarily better saying, okay, well, I'm going to take Devontae Adams in this lineup, and then I'm going to take some other running back in this lineup, because now you're counting on 2 different offenses to be able to move the ball, as opposed to, if you tell me the Raiders score 30 points, I'll just take my chances on exactly how those points got scored and play both of those guys. So there is, the obvious concern that you're mentioning, but there are also potential positives. And then, especially now too, where you're in an environment where teams just score less points. If you happen to get the Raiders scoring a lot of points, it's even more so that you would probably just want both of those guys. So there are ways, obviously they can cut into each other, but I do think that they are fine together. Like, for them to have a big lead, they have to score points first. And Adams obviously could be a big part of that. So thanks for checking out the show. Don't forget to sign up using the links in the description below. Hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, all that stuff. I will be back tomorrow. No Monday, no showdown show for me in the morning with Neil. Have some stuff going on, but I will be back for my MLB show on this channel at 5 p.m. Eastern, talking MLB tournaments. So check that out. See you back here again tomorrow. Thanks for watching the show.